Alrighty guys, welcome back to another little video. So today I've got something kind of fun and kind of not really fun. So, okay, I was skulking around on AliExpress. This was probably close to a year ago now. It's been a while. Actually, I think it's been about 10 months. I was skulking around on AliExpress looking for dual socket CPU motherboards, and I came across this one. It's a dual socket X58, supposedly a really cool looking board. There's a few features that actually made it really interesting to me and like made me want to go out of my way to buy it. Number one, dual sockets, except for they're not actually sockets. The CPUs are soldered directly onto the motherboard. Second cool feature, each CPU has dual channel memory. So it should have 4 channels all in all. Which I know technically it's only dual channel because it's dual channel per CPU, and they're not sharing the bandwidth of the memory channels. But I digress. I guess the kind of interesting feature about the CPUs is that they are L5520s, which is on the older 45 nanometer process, but they still, in theory, should be pretty decent CPUs, which means that they should go up to about 2.4-ish, 2.5-ish all-core turbo. I forget exactly what it is. I'll put it up on screen here. But there's just a few problems with the motherboard. So, I kind of put this video off because I didn't want to be like, oh yeah, look at how bad this thing is. I wanted to try and get to the bottom of the situation before I made any, well, rash decisions. But after testing this thing, I'm, well, to put it bluntly, I'm unimpressed. So, there's a couple of really cool other features to this motherboard. Like, number one, it has a SATA 3 M.2 slot built directly onto the motherboard, as well as a M.2 Wi-Fi slot directly on the motherboard. And yet again, that really seemed, I'm gonna put it bluntly, it seems awesome to me, being the fact that they're putting M.2 slots on an X58 motherboard. And then the last really cool feature that I noticed compared to other dual socket motherboards is that instead of having 2 8-pin connectors for the CPUs, it's only got 1, meaning that you're running both CPUs off of a single connector. Okay, but now that I've actually talked about the motherboard, let me talk about some of the kind of weirdness and the problems that have arisen. Okay, so after installing Windows on the PC, it felt snappy, it felt good, it felt relatively decent. It is 8 cores and 16 threads on a dual socket system. It should feel relatively powerful. It should feel relatively good. But I started running into weird problems almost immediately. Number one, at first I thought this was a glitch, but when I pulled up hardware info, it said that my CPUs were running at 50 degrees Celsius when they're pretty much at idle. Now yes, the CPU coolers that I have are not anything special, but that's the thing, is that these are low-powered Xeons. These things should not be pumping out a whole bunch of heat. Next, when I would put them under a heavy load, when I started using Cinebench R15, the CPUs would shoot up to 2.5 gigahertz the way they should, and then drop back down to 1.5 gigahertz. They're not hitting thermal throttle. They're hitting their power limit. And it's like, their power limit is 70 watts. How is it possible that these CPUs are hitting their power limit at 70 watts when they're only running at 1.5 gigahertz? That doesn't make sense. And the more looking into it, the more that I looked into this thing, the more I was trying to figure out, why is this thing turbo throttling? Why is this thing having so much power being pumped to the CPUs, but they are not able to maintain their turbo clocks? These things should be able to run at the 2.5 gigahertz pretty much perpetually. That's just the way these architectures work, at least as far as I was aware. But this thing is running at 1.5 gigahertz and hitting a 70-watt TDP on both CPUs. Like, I don't understand that. And the next thing that happened that goes along with that is the CPUs at idle were running at right about 50 degrees Celsius, and under full load, they were hitting 70 to 75 degrees Celsius. Let me make one thing perfectly clear. I know the CPU coolers that I was using was nothing super fantastic, but they should not be hitting that temperature unless they're being heavily overvolted. Now, I don't have any definitive proof about this, and I'm going to be doing some more testing in the coming days about what's going on with this PC. But they should not be hitting that kind of temperature, they should not be hitting that kind of power limit unless they were being heavily overvolted. And that's the best idea that I can come up with why this thing is giving me so many issues. Why is the CPUs, or why are the CPUs being so heavily overvolted? When I tried to pull up hardware info, nothing. Hardware monitor, nothing. It was telling me that it was hitting power limit, but it couldn't tell me what the voltages of the CPU was running at. I pulled up CPU-Z. It, yet again, could tell me that the CPUs were essentially hitting their maximum TDP, but it would not tell me the core voltage that they were running at, which I've never had a problem with on any of these CPUs or any of these motherboards beforehand. When I use my dual X59 system, it doesn't have that issue. It doesn't run into that same issue, where I can check the core voltages for both CPUs to see what they're currently running at. This one I could not. So I don't know if mine is just purely a defective unit, or if there's just inherently something wrong with this motherboard, but I couldn't get it to run at anything above the 1.5 gigahertz clock, and that's not even its base clock. That's what it was throttling down to due to power limit. This is kind of a shorter video, and I don't want this one to be, like, super negative, because I still need to do more testing on the system, but it's like, it just doesn't make sense to me. I've got a couple extra water blocks and an extra pump and res. I might just try water cooling the things, putting both CPUs under water cooling just to see what it's going to do. But honestly, I don't know what to say about these things. So, guys, I'm just going to kind of put this video out there. Be warned about this motherboard on AliExpress. It might be one of the cheapest dual-socket motherboards on the market. Maybe it's just my unit, maybe I've done something wrong, maybe it's the CPU coolers, maybe it's something I did in the BIOS. I looked around in the BIOS, I couldn't find anything, but maybe there's something I did, and I'll update, or I'll do more videos updating about this. But just for now, guys, be warned if you're going to be looking at a dual X58 motherboard or a dual socket X58 motherboard off of AliExpress. Yeah, that's about as far as I got for today. Thank you very much for watching. See you guys later. Peace.